image of parenting that side opposition provided today for you is, in my opinion, quite abysmal. Because their stance today, ladies and gentlemen, is that parents have zero responsibility for the criminal actions of their children. And that the only measure that our legal systems can take is by incarcerating these minors and making sure they don't do it again, because the parents have no say in it. But we've already given you an example where parents have the responsibility whether the knowledge is established or not. In the case of truancy, the parents are still held responsible. They're still called up to school. And side opposition conceded to this example because they never said that parents have to be called to school only when they know about it. This example clearly establishes how parents are responsible, a point that side opposition simply refuses to accept. But before determining the result of today's debate, there are three critical questions that must be answered. First, should we punish those that are responsible? Second, are parents responsible? And third, and finally, so parents should be held liable? And today's side proposition believes that we've given you a proven yes to all three questions. So let's move on to the first, on the case of responsibility. Now today we agreed that in cases of direct responsibility that the adults can be held criminally liable. But it's a question of children. Now side opposition today advocated the same punishment for children, which inherently means that they totally neglected the principal meaning of minors, which have been clearly delineated by our Deputy Prime Minister. How children don't get voting rights, they don't get driver's license, which means our legal system acknowledged that children are not up to have certain responsibilities that are thus delegated to their parents, a point they've never come back to. So where does that responsibility go? That's why we brought up the concept of criminal negligence, a concept they never dealt with. If anything, they said, is that if knowledge of the crime is not established, then the parent should be punished. But it's actually rather questionable whether a parent does not know whether their daughter is roaming the streets at 2 a.m. by soliciting sex, whether their child is not doing truancy when they keep being called into school, and even if they didn't know certain times, it is questionable why they wouldn't have measures to make sure that this doesn't occur a second time. This is why the responsibility is established. Because there are ways for parents to take measures that they choose not to take and thus foster and harbor future crime. So we move on to our second question. So are parents responsible for their children? Now today's side opposition conceded in the case of active involvement that it is an adult crime and should be punished. Well, in that case the world is already just. But they said if it isn't already established then we shouldn't be doing it because it clogs up the system. But we see that as a contradiction, because if you concede to existing institutions that does exactly what side proposition is advocating today, but refuses change which is going to bring progress in terms of extending this kind of justice, then what do you really have? But they did go against passive engagement, in which they said, well, what about the parents if they don't know? And what if it's out of spite? Well, we said they weren't listening to the first step of our policy, and that was a gross misrepresentation of our case. Because we clearly delineated to you that only when it's proven that parents have responsibility in terms of criminal negligence, then are we going to punish them. We also gave you legal examples in the civil realm with Waterhouse auditing firms, which they've never come back to, on how even though you don't have individual responsibility, you still can be punished. So ladies and gentlemen, we come to the final and last question of today's debate. So should parents be held liable for their children's actions? Well, our deputy already extended our case in showing you how we're going to have rehabilitation and reintegration for these children. What side opposition wants is an aggravation of the status quo. They're going to choose education as a means of incarceration. And we say, why punish them when we should redirect them? Then why shouldn't we punish those that should have been directed them in the first place? They say to each their own punishment. Well, we say that's exactly the truth. Why not punish the ones that should have been responsible for their children, and why not educate those that needed it in the first place? We beg you to propose. Thank you very much.